A single father rushed to pull a stranger from a burning car. He thought it was just another act of decency until she returned and changed everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sky had dimmed to a heavy charcoal gray by the time Marcus shifted his truck into second and turned onto the county road. His daughter, Grace, lay asleep in the back seat, her small frame curled under a thrift store blanket, clutching the stuffed fox she never let go of. The heater coughed like an old man trying to keep up with the cold, but it was doing its best. Marcus glanced at the fuel gauge. Almost on empty. Again. The road was quiet. Too quiet. Just endless blacktop and bare trees bowing in the wind. He'd taken this route 1,000 times before, but tonight something felt off. A tension sat in his gut, tight and twitching. Maybe it was the bills he hadn't opened yet, or the way his mother had looked pale this morning when she insisted she was fine. He didn't know. All he knew was the road ahead didn't look right. It started as a flicker of light, just a faint glow up ahead. Then, suddenly, fire. Marcus slammed on the brakes. His tires skidded across wet pavement as the flames came into full view. A silver car, crumpled against a tree like a crushed soda can, was engulfed in smoke. The front end hissed with steam, the engine whining its last breath. There was movement inside, barely. A figure slumped over the steering wheel. He didn't think, he just acted. "Stay in the truck," he barked at Grace, who'd jolted awake. She sat up, blinking in confusion, as he yanked open the door and sprinted toward the wreck. The heat hit him like a wall. Smoke clawed at his throat. The driver's side window was shattered, glass glinting like ice shards in the dirt. He reached in, coughing hard, his hands finding the seatbelt. It was stuck. The woman inside groaned, her head lolling back just enough for him to catch a glimpse of her face. Blood on her forehead, eyes fluttering open, then closed. "Hang on," he muttered, yanking his knife from his pocket. One quick slice. The belt snapped free. A loud pop burst from under the hood. Flames licked closer. He pulled her out, lifting with all the strength his tired back had left. She was lighter than expected, but dead weight still felt like iron. He barely cleared the car before the fire jumped. The hood erupted, sending sparks into the trees like angry fireflies. He shielded her body, shielding both of them with his own. Breathless, on the cold grass, he looked down at her face. She was alive. Barely. And something in him whispered, this was only the beginning. Marcus didn't remember standing up. His legs moved on instinct, pushing through the numbness in his thighs as he carried the unconscious woman toward the truck. The flames behind him roared louder, sending a spray of orange into the sky. Sirens were still nowhere. Out here, they could take 10, maybe 15 minutes to arrive. That kind of delay could cost lives. He wasn't going to let that happen. He opened the passenger door and eased her onto the seat, brushing glass from her jacket with shaking fingers. Blood was smeared across her temple, her hair matted to her skin, but she was breathing. Shallow and uneven, but breathing. That was something. Grace sat frozen in the back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "Daddy, who is she?" Marcus didn't answer at first. He grabbed a worn flannel from the back of the seat and pressed it gently against the gash on the woman's forehead. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low, his mind still trying to catch up. "She crashed. I couldn't just leave her." The smell of smoke followed him into the truck, bitter and sharp. He slammed the door shut and turned the key. The engine sputtered, hesitated, then caught. Thank God. His hands trembled as he turned onto the road, keeping one eye on her, the other on the darkness ahead. The hospital was 25 minutes away if traffic was good, but tonight, with the roads slick and visibility low, it would take longer. He pressed the gas anyway. At every turn, the truck groaned under the strain. The dashboard lights flickered. The heater wheezed. He couldn't afford for it to break down. Not now. He didn't know who this woman was, but she'd nearly died in front of him, and Marcus wasn't the kind of man who could drive away from something like that. She stirred once, a quiet sound, almost a whimper. Her eyes opened for a split second, dazed and unfocused, then closed again. "You're okay," Marcus whispered, even though he wasn't sure she was. "You're safe." He didn't notice the tears on Grace's cheeks until they were halfway there. "Is she gonna die?" Marcus's throat clenched. He didn't know how to answer that. "I hope not," he said. Then, quieter, to himself, "I really hope not." The hospital lights cast a harsh glare on the wet pavement as Marcus skidded into the emergency bay, tires screeching, engine coughing, like it had one last breath to give. Before the truck had fully stopped, he was out of the driver's seat, yanking the passenger door open. "She's unconscious. Car accident," he called out, his voice loud, almost too loud. Nurses ran toward him, a stretcher already rolling between them. One of them barked orders into a radio clipped to her scrubs, her expression sharp with urgency. Another grabbed the door and helped lift the woman out of the truck with practiced precision. Marcus backed away, hands raised like he might somehow help by not being in the way. The doors flung open, and they disappeared into the brightness of the ER, swallowed by the white walls and clinical chaos. He stood there for a long second, unmoving, soaked in sweat and smoke. His chest heaved, his heartbeat was still sprinting. The adrenaline hadn't left his body yet, it had taken root and wasn't letting go. Grace had followed him out of the truck, her eyes big and scared, her little hand clutching his jacket sleeve. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Marcus knelt beside her and pulled her close. "She's in good hands now," he murmured. "They'll take care of her." A nurse appeared beside them, clipboard in hand. "Sir, did you know the patient? Are you a relative?" "No," Marcus said, wiping soot from his face. "I just saw the crash, pulled her out." The nurse looked up from her form, studying him for a moment. "Then you saved her life." He didn't respond. It didn't feel like heroism. It felt like survival. Inside, the sliding doors whooshed open again as a police officer stepped through. Tall, heavy-set, young. He walked with a notepad in one hand, his other resting near his belt. "You the guy who pulled the woman out of the wreck?" he asked. Marcus nodded, standing up straighter. "Got a few questions for you." Of course he did. Marcus rubbed his face and looked down at Grace. "She's 7, he said. "Can she stay here with me while we talk?" The officer nodded. "That's fine." He followed the man to a quiet bench in the hallway. The questions came quickly. What road were you on? What direction was she coming from? Did she say anything? Had she been drinking? Marcus answered every one, calm, measured, truthful. But something about the officer's tone, it wasn't suspicious, not quite, but it wasn't warm either. Like Marcus was just another loose thread in a story waiting to unravel. When it was over, Marcus asked the only question that had started to form in his mind. "Is she going to make it?" The officer shrugged, closing his notebook. "They're working on her now. Guess we'll see." The waiting room was a graveyard of plastic chairs and worn-out magazines, but to Marcus it might as well have been purgatory. He sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. Grace leaned against his side, wrapped in a blanket a nurse had given her, eyes fighting to stay open. Midnight had come and gone, the hospital hummed around them, voices through intercoms, distant beeping monitors, the quiet shuffle of nurses changing shifts, but nothing from behind the double doors that led to the trauma unit. Every so often someone in scrubs would walk past, and Marcus's heart would lurch. But they never stopped, never looked his way. He'd seen the damage. The car was crumpled like paper. The flames had swallowed it in seconds. If he had hesitated even once, she'd be dead. The thought haunted him more than he wanted to admit. Not because he knew her, he didn't, but because something about her face, so pale and fragile, when he pulled her from that wreck, kept flashing in his mind like a warning he couldn't ignore. Another hour passed, then another. Finally the doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, her expression neutral but not grim. Marcus stood up so fast, Grace startled beside him. "She's stable," the doctor said, unconscious, But she's breathing on her own now. She has a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. But she's going to make it." Marcus exhaled slowly. It was like someone had just drained the pressure from his chest. "Thank you," he said, barely above a whisper. "She's lucky," the doctor added. "Whoever pulled her out got to her just in time." He nodded but said nothing. Lucky, that wasn't the word he would have used. It felt too small. The doctor glanced toward Grace. "We'll move her to a room soon. She won't be able to answer many questions for a while, but if you're the one who helped, she might want to see you when she wakes up." "I'm not family," Marcus said quickly. "Maybe not," the doctor replied, "but that doesn't mean you're not important." Marcus sat back down, Grace resting her head in his lap. He looked at the blank wall ahead of him, wondering why it felt like everything in his life had just shifted, like something irreversible had begun, and he had no idea where it would lead. The morning sunlight cut through the hospital windows in thin blades, turning sterile floors into mirrors. Marcus hadn't slept. He didn't need a clock to know the night had passed. His body told him in every sore muscle, every slow breath. Grace was curled up in the chair beside him now, asleep again, her cheek pressed against his jacket. He hadn't planned to stay this long. After the doctor's update, he told himself they'd go home. But when he stood to leave, something in him resisted, as if walking away would break some silent promise he'd made when he dragged that woman from the fire. A nurse appeared mid-morning, clipboard in hand. "She's awake," she said, her voice quiet, respectful. "Still disoriented, but she's asking questions." Marcus hesitated. "She asked about me?" The nurse nodded. "She said the last thing she remembers is headlights, then smoke, then someone's arms around her. Said she remembers a man's voice telling her she'd be okay." He didn't know what to do with that. He hadn't done anything special. He just reacted. Anyone with a heart would have done the same, or at least that's what he told himself, but the weight of it still hung on him, like the fire had scorched more than just her car. "She doesn't know your name," the nurse added. "I can tell her you've gone, if that's what you want." Marcus looked down at Grace, still sleeping peacefully, then back toward the hallway. "No," he said after a pause. "I'll talk to her." The nurse led him down the corridor, past glass windows and rooms filled with machines, quiet patients, and soft television noise. When they reached her door, the nurse gave him a look, half caution, half encouragement, and stepped away. Marcus pushed the door open. She was sitting upright, bandages across her forehead, one wrist in a cast, and oxygen tubes barely visible beneath her nose. Her hair was a tangled mess of brunette waves, but her eyes were clear now, sharp, awake. When she saw him, something in her expression shifted, confusion melting into something deeper, recognition, and maybe relief. "You?" she said, her voice raspy but certain. "You're the one who pulled me out?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, that was me." Her eyes didn't leave his. "You saved my life." He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to say. "I was just there. Right time, I guess." But the look on her face said otherwise, like something in her world had cracked open, and he had walked right through it. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. Marcus stood by the door, unsure if he should step inside or turn around and walk away. The woman in the hospital bed watched him with eyes that didn't match the machines and bandages around her. They were clear, alive, studying him like she was trying to put a puzzle back together, piece by jagged piece. "You don't even know my name," she said after a moment, her voice hoarse but steady. He stepped in finally, shutting the door behind him. "Didn't need to know it. I just knew you were in trouble." A faint smile touched the corner of her lips, barely there. "It's Vivian Hale." The name didn't register, not at first. He nodded politely. "I'm Marcus. This is not how I usually meet people." Vivian chuckled, but it turned into a wince, her hand instinctively going to her ribs. Marcus took another step forward, then stopped himself. She looked fragile, like the wrong movement might undo her. "I didn't mean to—" he started. "No, I'm fine," she said, catching her breath. "Broken bones and bruises. Could have been worse." "It was going to be," Marcus said. "That fire. If I'd been a minute later—" "You weren't," she cut in softly. "You weren't." There was a pause. She glanced at the tray of untouched hospital food on the side table, then back at him. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Why not just call 911 and keep driving?" Marcus looked at the floor, jaw tightening. That question had been swimming in his mind too, though never from that angle. "Because I couldn't leave someone to burn alive," he said simply. "Because I've lost someone before, and I know what it's like when help comes too late." Vivian blinked. Something behind her expression shifted. "I don't remember much," she whispered. "Just your voice, telling me I was safe." "You were," he said. "You still are." Another silence passed. Not awkward, just real. Marcus turned to leave. "I didn't come for thanks. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "Wait," she said, her voice catching him mid-step. He turned back. "Your daughter," she asked. "Was that her in the truck?" He nodded. Vivian nodded back, something unreadable in her eyes. She looked like she was holding the whole world together. Marcus smiled, small and tired. "She is." 3 days passed before Vivian was moved out of the ICU. Marcus hadn't planned to visit again, but he did. Twice. The second time, he brought Grace. He hadn't wanted to at first, didn't want to expose her to the smell of antiseptic or the sight of tubes and bandages, but Grace insisted. She was curious, persistent in that way children are when something scares them, and they don't understand why. The private room Vivian had been moved to was more hotel suite than hospital space. Clean linens, flowers, soft lighting. Grace peeked inside first, holding a small, crumpled piece of paper in her hand. Vivian turned from the window when she heard the knock. She looked better, still pale, but upright, alert. Her arm was in a sling now, and a thin line of bruising traced her cheekbone like a fading shadow. "Hi," Grace said softly. "I made this for you." Vivian blinked, surprised, then smiled. "For me?" Grace nodded and stepped forward, handing over the folded page. Crayon lines filled the paper. 2 stick figures holding hands, one taller, one shorter, with flames drawn in orange behind them. A heart hovered between them in red. "I hope you don't mind," Marcus said from the doorway. "She's been drawing it since yesterday." Vivian unfolded it with care, as if it might tear just from her touch. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice thickening. "That's us?" Grace nodded proudly. "That's me and my dad pulling you from the fire." Vivian laughed, caught somewhere between touched and overwhelmed. "You're a very talented artist, Grace." Grace beamed, then walked to the side of the bed without asking, and sat down like they were old friends. Marcus stayed back, uneasy, but Vivian glanced at him and gave the smallest nod, inviting, not pressuring. "I was really scared," Grace said. "When the fire started, I thought maybe we wouldn't get you out in time." "I was scared too," Vivian replied honestly. "But then I heard your dad's voice, and I thought maybe I'd be okay." Grace leaned her head on Vivian's arm without a word, just rested there like it was the most natural thing in the world. And something in Vivian's expression cracked open. It was subtle, but Marcus saw it. The walls she lived behind, whatever they were, however high, they were shifting, because somehow in that sterile, quiet room a bond had begun forming, and it had nothing to do with gratitude. Vivian couldn't stop thinking about them after they left. The girl with eyes too wide for her age, and a father who didn't seem to know how tired he looked. There was something about the way they existed together, like life had carved pieces out of them, but somehow they still fit. Later that evening, when the nurse checked her vitals and asked if she needed anything, Vivian almost said yes. She almost asked for a phone to look them up, to know who they were beyond the man who pulled her from fire and the little girl who leaned into her like she'd known her forever. But she didn't ask. Instead, she stared at the crayon drawing taped beside her bed. It felt strangely out of place here, surrounded by machines and soft beeping monitors, but she didn't take it down. She couldn't. Somewhere across town, Marcus stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, rinsing out the same mug he'd used every morning for the past 6 years. Grace sat at the small table, finishing a bowl of cereal for dinner without complaint. The heat was on, but barely. The old unit rattled whenever it kicked in. His mom was asleep in the other room. She'd been quieter lately, thinner. He didn't talk about it, but he watched her when she thought he wasn't looking. The same way he watched their food supply, the unpaid utility bills, the growing crack in the kitchen window. The house was full of worn-down edges. But tonight, Grace's drawing sat on the fridge, stuck up with a magnet shaped like a cow. He looked at it longer than he meant to. "I liked her," Grace said suddenly, spoon clinking against the bowl. Marcus turned around. "Yeah?" Grace nodded. "She didn't talk down to me." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "She's different, kiddo. Different kind of life." "She's nice," Grace added, "and kinda sad." That last word caught him off guard. Sad. He hadn't noticed it right away, but now that Grace had said it, it lingered. The way Vivian had looked at the drawing, the quiet between her words, the hesitation behind her eyes. He didn't know what her story was. But he had a feeling this wasn't over, not yet. The hospital released Vivian 4 days later. A black car waited at the curb, sleek and silent, its windows tinted so dark it looked more like a secret than a ride. The driver stepped out without a word, opening the door and helping her inside as if it were all rehearsed. And maybe it was. Maybe that was how her world worked. Clean lines, quiet movements, no questions. But as the car pulled away, her fingers still clutched the drawing Grace had made. Folded now, edges soft from being opened and refolded too many times. She hadn't told anyone she was keeping it. She hadn't told anyone why she hadn't already called her lawyers, her assistants, her PR team. Something about the fire had done more than bruise her ribs. It had cracked something open. She stared out the window as the city passed in flashes. She didn't ask where they were going. She knew. The penthouse. The elevator opened directly into her apartment. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Immaculate, impersonal, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows with million-dollar views, imported furniture, a grand piano she hadn't touched in months. There were no signs of the crash, no reminders, just silence, polished and spotless. She stood in the center of the room and felt like a stranger. She thought about the chipped coffee mug Marcus had held, how his daughter had shared cereal with her feet swinging beneath a too-small table. She remembered the way the air had smelled faintly of motor oil and warmth. There had been noise, laughter, tiredness, yes, but also life. She wandered toward the massive kitchen island and set the drawing down like it was made of glass. Her reflection caught in the marble counter, bruised face, sling over one shoulder, hair tucked back behind her ears. She looked like someone who had just barely survived something. And maybe she had. Vivian pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered for a long moment before she typed in the name she'd asked the nurse to find for her. Marcus Wilkes. The screen loaded slowly. She tapped the number. He answered after 2 rings. "Marcus." Her voice was soft, unsure. "It's Vivian." A pause. "I know," he said. "I figured I might hear from you." She looked down at the drawing. "I was wondering," she said, steadying her breath, "would it be all right if I came by?" Marcus didn't answer right away. The line went quiet for just a second too long, long enough for Vivian to regret asking. But then she heard him sigh, not annoyed, just tired. "Yeah," he said, "you can come by." She didn't know what she expected after that. A set time, directions, some acknowledgement of how strange this was. But instead he said, "We're home most evenings," and hung up. No small talk, no ceremony. It was exactly like him. 3 hours later, a town car dropped her off at the edge of a cracked driveway lined with bare trees. The house in front of her sagged slightly on one side, like it had grown tired of holding itself up. The porch light flickered with a yellow hum. Wind brushed through the nearby field, whispering through dry grass and chain-link fencing, and yet none of it felt unwelcoming. She stood there for a moment, feeling wildly out of place in her tailored coat and polished shoes. The cold bit through the fabric, reminding her she was no longer in a world of chauffeurs and climate control. Before she could knock, the door opened. Grace stood there in socked feet, her hair a little wild, a smudge of something, maybe chocolate, on her cheek. "Hi," she said with a grin like they'd been expecting company all along. Vivian smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." Grace stepped aside without hesitation. "We saved you the good chair." Vivian stepped in, eyes adjusting to the dim, warm interior. The place smelled like garlic and old wood. A pot simmered on the stove. Somewhere in the back, a dog barked from another house. It felt alive. The kind of alive she hadn't felt in years. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, towel slung over one shoulder. He looked at her the way someone does when they're trying not to overthink why someone from another life has stepped into theirs. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He gestured toward the table, where a third plate was already set out. "I didn't want to assume," he said, "but Grace said you'd come." Vivian looked at the chair, then at Grace, who was already climbing into hers. "Your daughter's very persuasive." Marcus gave a small smile. "Yeah, she gets that from her mom." The room went still for a moment. He hadn't talked about her before. Vivian just nodded, quietly taking her seat. The meal was simple: pasta, garlic bread, a small salad. But it tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months, because it wasn't just food. It was a place at a table. Vivian had been in rooms filled with chandeliers and silver forks polished until they shimmered like mirrors. She'd dined beside senators and billionaires, toasted glasses worth more than most people's monthly rent. But nothing had ever tasted like the garlic bread on Marcus Wilkes' chipped ceramic plate. It crunched just enough. The butter was uneven, and when Grace handed her the bowl of salad with her tiny hands, Vivian felt something she hadn't in a long time: welcome. Not because of status or invitation, but because someone had set a place for her without needing a reason. Marcus ate slowly, like a man who wasn't used to having company. He didn't talk much, but he watched, observed. Every time Grace spoke, he leaned in. Every time Vivian winced, still sore from the crash, he noticed. It wasn't performative. It wasn't pity. It was just care, the quiet kind. "So are you like super rich?" Grace asked mid-meal, stabbing a tomato with more intensity than necessary. Vivian nearly choked. Marcus looked up sharply. "Grace," he said, half a warning. But Vivian held up a hand, amused. "It's okay. She's just asking what most people are too polite to." Grace shrugged. "You came in a car that looks like a spaceship. That's rich stuff." Vivian smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "I guess I am." "But you don't talk like rich people," Grace added, mouth full. "They always sound bored." Marcus shook his head. "Chew before you speak?" Vivian laughed. She's not wrong. After dinner, Marcus cleared the table. Vivian offered to help, but he waved her off. Grace dragged her into the living room instead, showing her the tower of drawings she'd been working on. "This one's you in the fire," she said, holding up a page filled with red and orange scribbles. "And this one's when you got better." Vivian blinked, her throat tightening unexpectedly. The second drawing had her smiling, holding hands with two stick figures, Grace and Marcus. All three were standing in front of a lopsided house. "Is that your home?" she asked gently. Grace nodded. "Yeah, but you're in it too now." Vivian looked up, and in that single moment, everything about her life, the penthouse, the staff, the empire, felt like the loneliest place on earth. The night air had turned colder by the time Vivian stepped out onto the porch. Marcus stood there already, leaning against the railing, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. The porch light flickered behind them, casting soft shadows onto the steps. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. The sky was clear, no city glow to drown the stars. She could see every one of them. "I didn't expect dinner," she said quietly. "I didn't expect you to come," he replied, sipping from the mug without looking at her. Vivian folded her arms against her chest. The sling itched under her coat, the dull ache in her ribs pulsing with each breath, but she didn't want to go back inside. Not yet. "You're not like I imagined," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly did you imagine me?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Gruffer, maybe a little colder, less patient." He chuckled low, like the sound surprised even him. "Guess saving your life set the bar pretty high?" She didn't smile, not this time. "I meant what I said back at the hospital," she murmured. "You could have left me. You didn't." Marcus finally looked at her then, really looked. "Couldn't have lived with myself if I had." A long silence fell between them. "I don't really have anyone," she said suddenly, voice catching. "Not really. A few board members who pretend they care, staff that disappears the second the lights go out. I thought maybe money would fix that. But money doesn't come sit by your bed while you're unconscious." Marcus leaned his elbows on the rail. "No, it doesn't." They both stared into the darkness for a while, like maybe the night itself could give them answers they weren't brave enough to say out loud. She turned toward him, her voice almost a whisper. "You ever think some people just don't get a family?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I used to think that. Before Grace." Vivian's throat closed. He glanced at her. "What about you?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. The stars blurred slightly, just for a second. "I don't know yet," she whispered, "but tonight felt closer." The next morning came with fog clinging low to the fields, and a quiet that felt almost deliberate. Vivian hadn't intended to stay the night. She'd only meant to stop by, maybe say thank you in a way a hospital room couldn't hold. But 1 hour had turned to 2, then dinner, then a moment on the porch too honest to walk away from. Marcus had offered the pull-out couch, and she hadn't said no. Now she stood in the small hallway just outside the kitchen, the scent of coffee drifting in like something sacred. She could hear Grace humming to herself, off-key and happy, flipping through what sounded like a cereal box. Marcus's voice was low, steady, reading the back aloud like it was a bedtime story. Vivian hovered there longer than she should have. When she finally stepped inside, Grace lit up. "You're awake." "Barely," Vivian said, brushing hair from her face. "But the smell of that coffee might have saved me all over again." Marcus handed her a mug without a word. The warmth of it hit her fingers like a small act of kindness no one had ever thought to offer before. She took it and held it close. "I hope it's not weird that I stayed," she said. "It's not," Marcus replied. "We've had weirder." Grace looked up from her cereal, like when the ceiling fell in last spring. Vivian raised a brow. "Storm knocked the tree branch through the roof," Marcus clarified. "Wasn't pretty." "But Dad fixed it," Grace added proudly. "He always fixes everything." Vivian smiled, but it faded quickly. "Not everything can be fixed," she said quietly, more to herself than to them. Marcus heard it. She saw it in the way his jaw shifted slightly. He didn't ask what she meant, and she didn't explain. After breakfast, she helped wash dishes, one-handed and slow, insisting anyway. Marcus finally gave up protesting, leaning beside her at the sink. "You don't have to keep coming here," he said softly, not unkind. "You've got a whole life waiting on the other side of the city." She rinsed a cup, set it on the rack, then looked up at him. "Maybe I'm tired of that life waiting," she said. "Maybe I want to walk into something that doesn't expect anything from me." Marcus didn't answer, but he didn't look away, and neither did she. Vivian returned home that afternoon, but nothing felt like home anymore. The elevator doors opened to her penthouse with a soft chime, but the moment she stepped inside, the silence pressed against her like a wall. Her heels echoed on the polished floors, each step sounding too sharp, too clean. Everything was in its place, perfectly aligned furniture, untouched fruit bowl, spotless counters, but none of it felt lived in. She dropped her keys on the marble island, the clatter startling in the stillness. For a while she just stood there staring out through the glass windows at the skyline. Her reflection stared back. Perfect posture, tailored coat, expression unreadable, but inside something was unraveling. She peeled the coat off slowly, let it fall over the back of a chair, and walked barefoot toward the hallway. Every room she passed felt colder than the last. The office where she'd fought for. Deals worth millions. The guest bedroom, untouched for months. The master suite, where the sheets remained tucked, untouched by anything real. No laughter. No music. No Grace sitting on the floor drawing pictures of people who actually saw her. She stopped at the edge of her bed and sat down, like the weight of everything had finally caught up. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. Board meeting rescheduled to Thursday. Media team still waiting for your approval on the recovery statement. Also, the investor brunch. Should we confirm your attendance? Vivian stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked it without replying. The world she'd built, strategic, polished, relentless, was knocking. But her hand wouldn't open the door this time. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded crayon drawing Grace had given her. The edges were soft now, worn from being held. She ran her thumb over the stick figures, that crooked house, that red heart between them. She stood up, walked to the massive stainless steel fridge, and without a second thought pressed the paper flat and stuck it there with a magnet shaped like a golden lion. It looked ridiculous against the cold, gleaming metal. But for the first time in a long time, something about it felt right. She stepped back, arms crossed, eyes locked on that child's drawing, and she whispered to the silence, "I'm going back." Marcus didn't expect her to show up again so soon. He was halfway through patching a leak in the garage roof when he heard Grace's voice through the open window. "She's back!" He nearly lost his balance on the ladder. By the time he climbed down, wiping sweat and dust from his hands, Vivian was already standing at the base of the porch, holding a paper bag in one hand and shielding her eyes from the sun with the other. She looked different today, less polished. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, no makeup, worn jeans, and a gray hoodie that didn't belong in her world, but fit perfectly in his. "I brought food," she called out, lifting the bag slightly. "And don't say no. Grace already saw me." Marcus shook his head, but there was a ghost of a smile behind it. "You bribing your way in now?" "If it works, I won't stop," she said, walking past him like she'd always belonged there. Grace took the bag from her like it was treasure, dragging it to the kitchen. Marcus followed her in, unsure how to feel. This was new territory, familiarity creeping in where there used to be caution. "Didn't think I'd see you again this soon," he said, leaning against the counter. Vivian turned to him, her voice softer now. "I didn't think I'd want to come back this soon." He studied her, the way she held herself, not like a guest, but like someone who had been away and missed it. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I went home. I sat in that giant apartment full of everything I thought I wanted, and all I could think about was your daughter asking me if I'd be in her drawing." Marcus looked down, his jaw tight. "She doesn't get attached easily." "Neither do I," Vivian said. Silence filled the space between them. Then she stepped closer. "This place, it's rough. The roof leaks, the floors creak, and I think your stove growled at me last time." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It does that sometimes." She smiled. "But it's real. And I think I'm tired of everything that isn't." He didn't say anything, just reached into a drawer, pulled out a mug, and filled it with coffee. Set it gently in front of her. Vivian took it like a peace offering, and in that moment neither of them felt like visitors in each other's lives anymore. Later that night, the three of them sat in the living room, curled around mismatched cushions and a beat-up coffee table covered in puzzle pieces. Grace had picked the box, a woodland animal theme, and was determined to finish it before bedtime. She worked with a kind of quiet intensity that mirrored her father, tongue peeking out between her lips as she concentrated. Vivian had kicked off her shoes and tucked her legs beneath her on the carpet, holding a piece in her hand, but mostly watching the two of them. The way Marcus leaned in when Grace asked for help. The way his hand hovered just enough to guide her, but never take over. He let her lead. Always. She hadn't seen that before. Not in boardrooms, not in childhood, not in any of the relationships she'd fumbled through over the years. Control had been her currency, but this was something else entirely. Respect, maybe, or trust. "You're staring," Marcus said, not looking up. She blinked, caught. "I'm just taking it in." He gave a small grunt that might have been a laugh. Grace looked up. "You're bad at puzzles." Vivian smiled. "That's probably true." "We can teach you," Grace said without hesitation. "We're a good team." Vivian nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can see that." When Grace finally grew too tired to hold her eyes open, Marcus carried her to bed, whispering something soft into her hair as she clung to his shoulder. Vivian stood in the hallway, watching from a distance, feeling like an intruder in a moment that had nothing to do with her, but wishing it did. When Marcus returned, his face was gentler, touched by something unspoken. He sat back down across from her at the coffee table. The puzzle remained half-finished between them. "She used to ask if her mom was coming back," he said suddenly. No preface, no warning, just the truth. Vivian didn't move. "And now?" "She doesn't ask anymore," he said, voice low. "But she watches the door sometimes, like she still hopes." The quiet stretched long between them. "She doesn't need perfect," Vivian said. "She just needs someone who stays." Marcus looked at her then, really looked, and didn't look away. Vivian's visits became more frequent after that night. There was no schedule, no plans. She'd just show up, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with takeout, once with a basket of apples from a farmer's market she'd passed on the drive. Marcus never asked her to come, and she never asked if she could. She just did. And each time, the hesitation in her eyes faded a little more. It didn't take long for people to notice. The first sign came at the gas station just off Route 17. Marcus was filling up the truck when he heard it. Two men at the next pump, talking just a little too loudly. "That her? The one from the crash?" "Looks like it. Doesn't really fit in, does she? Rich type." "You think he's got something going on with her?" "Maybe. Or maybe she's just slumming it for a while." Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't flinch. But something behind his ribs tightened like a fist. He finished filling the tank, got in the truck, and drove home without a word. That evening he didn't speak much during dinner. Grace picked up on it right away, watching him from across the table with cautious eyes. Vivian was quieter too. She sensed the shift, even if she didn't know the reason. After Grace went to bed, she lingered in the kitchen while Marcus stood at the sink, scrubbing a dish a little too hard. "They're talking, aren't they?" she asked softly. He didn't turn around. "Small town. People notice things." "I can leave," she said, "if it makes it easier for you." Now he did turn, slowly, the dish in his hand still dripping. "Is that what you want?" She met his eyes. "No." "Then don't say it like it is." The silence that followed was heavy, not angry, just full of all the things neither of them wanted to admit out loud. "It's not you I'm worried about," he said finally. "It's Grace." Vivian's throat tightened. "You think I'll hurt her?" "I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's starting to think you'll stay." "I haven't given her a reason not to." "Not yet," he said. "But one day your world's going to call you back, and I don't want her looking out the window, waiting for someone else who never shows." Vivian stepped closer, her voice low. "Then maybe it's time someone proved staying is possible." The next morning, the storm rolled in without warning. Thick clouds blanketed the sky, and by mid-afternoon, the rain fell hard enough to turn the dirt road outside Marcus's house into a ribbon of mud. The wind howled through the trees like it was angry, shaking loose leaves that slapped against the windows like impatient hands. Vivian was already there when it hit, trapped by timing or fate. She didn't know which. She stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the gray blur, her reflection faint in the glass. Behind her, Marcus was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't all static and flood warnings. "This storm wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow," he muttered. "They never ask permission," Vivian said softly. Marcus glanced up. "You okay?" She nodded, then hesitated. "I used to love storms when I was a kid. They made the world feel honest." He studied her for a second, the way her fingers curled around the edge of the counter, the way she didn't look at him when she said it. Grace appeared in the hallway, in mismatched pajamas, holding a flashlight like a sword. "The power's gonna go out. I can feel it." Marcus grinned. "Then we better get the candles." By the time the lights flickered and died, the house had already been transformed. Candles glowed in the windowsills. The fireplace crackled to life. Vivian helped Grace gather pillows and blankets, and soon they had a fort built in the living room, the kind of messy, glorious structure that would have made a decorator cry. Inside it, Grace curled up with a book while Marcus tended the fire, and Vivian watched the flames as if they might speak. It was too perfect, too calm, which is why when the knock came at the door, it landed like a gunshot. Marcus stood slowly. Vivian tensed. He opened the door. A man in a suit stood there, soaked through, umbrella useless at his side. His expression was all sharp lines and business. "Miss Hale," he said, voice clipped, "you've missed 3 meetings. The board's demanding answers. We need to talk now." Grace peeked from the fort, her smile fading. Vivian didn't move. The storm had arrived. And this time it wasn't just outside. The tension in the room turned brittle, like a thread pulled too tight. Rain lashed against the windows as Vivian stood slowly, the candlelight casting long shadows on her face. The man at the door, Julian Hart, her executive liaison, looked wildly out of place in the glow of the homey chaos behind her. His suit clung to him like wet paper, and his eyes flicked around the living room with thinly veiled judgment. The pillow fort, the flannel, the quiet. "This really where you've been?" he asked, voice low, but not low enough. Marcus stiffened by the fireplace. Grace pulled deeper into the blankets. Vivian stepped between them. "Don't talk like this is a mistake," she said. Julian didn't blink. "The board's circling. Your absence is being interpreted as negligence. You vanish for a week, no explanation, no statement. Do you understand what that looks like from the outside?" "I don't care how it looks," Vivian replied, her voice like iron wrapped in silk. "You should," he snapped. "Because this—" He gestured vaguely at the room, at Marcus, at the storm shaking the windows. "Isn't your world, Vivian. These people aren't your people, and pretending you can disappear into it won't protect you from what's waiting back in the city." Vivian took a step forward. "You don't get to talk about them like that." Julian exhaled sharply, dropping his voice. "They're liabilities, all of them. If this gets out, you don't just lose public trust. You lose leverage. You built your brand on precision, on control. You walk away from that. There's no coming back." In the doorway, Marcus said nothing, but his jaw clenched, hard. Vivian didn't turn to look at him. She couldn't. Not yet. Her eyes stayed locked on Julian, fire building behind them. "Go wait in the car," she said. Julian stared at her. "Now." He left without another word, the wind nearly ripping the door from his hand as he went. Vivian turned back into the room. Everything looked different now, exposed. Marcus stood there, unreadable. "You said you weren't going to leave this time," he said, voice quiet. "Were you lying?" Vivian didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because the answer terrified her too much to speak. The door clicked shut behind Julian, but the damage lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Vivian stood in the center of the room, drenched in silence. The flickering candlelight no longer felt warm. It danced against the walls like a warning. Marcus hadn't moved. Grace was still in the pillow fort, eyes wide, small fingers clutching her blanket like it was armor. She didn't speak, but her stare said everything. She'd seen people walk out before. She knew what the quiet meant. Vivian stepped forward slow, cautious. "Marcus," she began, but he cut her off with a look. "You don't owe me anything," he said flatly. "I knew from the start who you were, what world you belonged to. That's not fair. It's honest." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It was the restraint that stung more than anger ever could. His hands were clenched at his sides, not in rage, but in disappointment. That was worse. "I didn't know he was coming," Vivian said. "I didn't ask him to. I didn't even answer his calls." "But you didn't tell him to stop either," Marcus replied. "You didn't tell your world you'd already found a different one." She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come, not the right ones. Not the ones that would fix this. "I'm trying," she said finally, voice cracking. "You think this is easy for me? I've spent years building something, and now every part of it feels like a trap I walked into blind." "Then why are you still holding the keys?" Marcus asked. That stopped her cold. She looked down at her hands, empty, shaking slightly. She didn't have the answer, not the kind that mattered, the part of her that had been trained to calculate risk, to weigh outcomes, to survive in boardrooms. None of it knew how to fight for something that didn't come with guarantees. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered. "Then stop treating it like it's temporary," Marcus said. He turned, walked down the hall to check on Grace. Vivian didn't follow. She just stood there. And for the first time since the crash, she truly felt like she might break. Vivian left without saying goodbye. The storm had softened to a cold drizzle by the time she slid into the back seat of Julian's car. The driver didn't speak, and Julian didn't look at her. He just sat beside her, staring out the window, tapping his fingers against his knee like a man counting seconds he never wanted to spend. No one spoke the entire drive back. She could still smell the smoke from the fireplace on her clothes. It clung to her like a memory, sharp and real and unwelcome in the clean sterility of the city streets they returned to. When the car pulled up to her building, she didn't get out right away. The glass doors loomed ahead, gleaming, the marble lobby beyond them empty and echoing. For a long moment, she just stared. Julian finally broke the silence. "He's not your life," he said. Vivian turned slowly toward him. "No, he's not. But he's the first thing in years that felt like it could be." Julian didn't flinch, but she saw it, just a flicker of something breaking through his mask. "You step back now," he warned. "You salvage everything. You step forward, you lose control. The board, the press, the investors, they won't wait for you to clean this up." "I'm not interested in cleaning it up," she said. "I'm interested in doing it differently." "You're playing a dangerous game, Vivian." She smiled then, tired and sharp. "I stopped playing games the day a stranger pulled me from a burning car and didn't ask for a single thing in return." She got out without another word. Upstairs, her penthouse felt colder than ever. The drawing still hung on the fridge, edges curling slightly, its red heart faded but unyielding. She stood there for a long time, staring at it, arms crossed, throat tight. Everything inside her screamed to call Marcus, to explain, to fix it. But some things couldn't be fixed with words. They had to be proven. And Vivian knew, for the first time in her life, that proving something real meant risking everything else. The days that followed passed like fog. Marcus woke, worked, fed Grace, patched up the garage roof, and went to sleep without letting his thoughts stray too far in any direction. That was the deal he made with himself. Keep it simple, keep it quiet. Pretend the space she left behind didn't still echo in every room. Grace didn't ask where Vivian had gone. She didn't need to. Kids knew. They always did. But she watched the door more, stared out the window longer after school. At night, she didn't fall asleep as fast. She didn't say anything, but Marcus heard the way she shifted in bed, restless, waiting for footsteps that didn't come. He wanted to hate Vivian for the intrusion, for making them hope, for the silence that came after. But he couldn't, because she hadn't promised anything. She'd never looked him in the eye and said she would stay. She'd just shown up, brought warmth with her, then left before it could turn into something real. He told himself he should be grateful for the time, for the memory. But gratitude wasn't what clawed at him in the quiet. It was the absence. One night, long after Grace had fallen asleep, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand, even though the dishwasher worked fine. He didn't need to do it. He just needed something to do, something to keep his hands moving, while his mind drifted to a woman standing barefoot in his kitchen, laughing at how terrible she was at puzzles, eating garlic bread like it was the first warm thing she'd tasted in months. The knock came just after midnight. He didn't move at first. He thought he imagined it, but then it came again, softer this time, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they were allowed to knock at all. He dried his hands and opened the door. There she was, Vivian. No driver, no coat, just her, hair damp from the mist, arms wrapped around herself like she didn't know what held her up anymore. "I'm not here to talk," she said, voice breaking. "I'm here to listen, and if you'll let me, maybe stay." Marcus didn't say a word. He just stepped back and left the door open. Vivian stood in the doorway for a long moment, her feet planted on the edge of the threshold, like the slightest movement might shatter whatever fragile thing had brought her back. The silence between them felt raw, too alive to be empty, too charged to be safe. But Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, arms at his sides, eyes holding hers like they hadn't broken. She stepped inside slowly. The door clicked shut behind her, soft but final. The house was the same uneven floorboards, same flicker from the hallway bulb, same scent of wood smoke and old coffee. But everything felt different, like it had been waiting. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her, but still didn't speak. "I let fear make the decision for me," she continued. "Fear of losing what I'd built. Fear of not knowing who I am without it. But when I walked away from you, from Grace, I realized I'd been lost long before I ever showed up here." She ran a hand through her damp hair, her voice cracking as she spoke. "I sat in that penthouse, looking out over a city that used to mean everything to me, and all I wanted was to be back in this house, tripping over blanket forts and getting teased about my terrible puzzle skills." A faint flicker crossed Marcus's face. "I'm not asking you to forget I left," she said. I need you to know that it wasn't because this didn't matter. It's because it mattered too much, and I didn't trust myself not to ruin it." Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was quieter than she remembered, rougher. "You can't protect something by leaving it." Vivian nodded. "I know that now." He stepped closer, slow but sure, until there was barely space between them. He looked at her like he was still trying to believe she was real. "And what are you here for now?" She met his eyes, tears pooling but not falling. "To stay," she said, "if you'll let me." This time, when Marcus reached for her, it wasn't cautious. It was home. Grace woke to the smell of pancakes. Not the box mix kind Marcus usually threw together when time allowed, but something richer, sweeter. Vanilla and cinnamon laced through the air like a memory of something better. She blinked, sat up, and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. The house was quiet, but not in the empty way it had been lately. It was a full quiet, a present one. She padded into the kitchen in bare feet, stopping at the doorway. Vivian stood at the stove, hair tied up in a messy knot, wearing one of Marcus's old flannel shirts over her clothes. She was focused, flipping a pancake with the kind of concentration Grace normally reserved for glue and glitter. "You're back," Grace said. Vivian turned, startled at first, but then smiled. It was soft, real. "I am," she said, and crouched down. "Only if you want me to be." Grace didn't answer. She just crossed the floor and wrapped her arms around Vivian's neck like it had never been in question. Marcus watched from the hallway, arms crossed, leaning against the frame. He didn't interrupt, just took in the moment. Grace letting go of weeks of waiting, Vivian grounding herself through the act of being needed. Later, the three of them sat at the table, syrup sticking to their fingers, sunlight slanting through the windows like a quiet blessing. Marcus didn't ask what this meant for tomorrow. He didn't press her for promises she wasn't ready to make. But when Vivian reached across the table to help Grace clean sticky fingers and didn't pull away after, something settled in his chest. It didn't feel like a guest anymore. It felt like something returning to where it was always meant to be. That afternoon, Vivian stood out on the porch with a mug of coffee warming her hands. Marcus joined her, both of them silent, as they watched Grace chase a butterfly across the overgrown yard. "Your world's going to come knocking again," Marcus said quietly. Vivian nodded. "And this time, I'm not answering." He looked at her, really looked, and she meant it. Every word. It started small, a second toothbrush in the bathroom, a cardigan left draped over the arm of the couch, her favorite tea tucked behind the coffee canister like it had always belonged there. Vivian didn't announce her staying. She didn't pack a suitcase or move in with fanfare. She just stopped leaving. Marcus noticed it first in the mornings, the quiet rhythm of her footsteps while she moved through the kitchen, the way Grace laughed louder now, like some hidden part of her had been waiting to exhale. The tension that used to live in his shoulders had started to loosen, little by little. And still, no one said it out loud. Not yet. Not even to themselves. Until the papers came. Vivian found them in a neat envelope, left on the porch by a courier. Marcus had been under the truck, tuning something that didn't want to be tuned, and Grace had been painting on the driveway with water and chalk. Vivian stood frozen at the top step, envelope in hand, the return address sharp and familiar. Sinclair Holdings Legal Division. She didn't open it right away. She didn't have to. The weight of the envelope told her everything she needed to know. It was the beginning of her end at the company. Or maybe just the company's way of saying they were done waiting for her to choose. Marcus watched her from the side of the truck, grease on his fingers, eyes narrowed but steady. "Bad news?" "No," she said, setting the envelope on the porch rail. "Just overdue." He stood, wiping his hands on a rag, watching her like he was trying to figure out if this was the moment she'd bolt again. She didn't move. Instead, she turned to him, eyes clear. "I'm thinking of selling." Marcus blinked. "The company?" She nodded. "My shares, my name, all of it." He stared at her like he didn't quite believe it. She stepped closer. "I don't want to be part of something that doesn't have a place for who I am now." Marcus looked at the envelope again, then at her. "You sure?" Vivian smiled, soft but unshaking. "I've never been more." The living room was quiet when Vivian walked in that night, her hands still trembling from signing the final papers. She had done it, stepped away, let go. The company she'd built her identity around, the name she had carved into glass and steel, the boardroom that once silenced when she entered. It was all behind her now. What waited in front of her was uncertainty, but also something else, something deeper. Grace was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, flipping through a picture book, her lips moving silently as she read. Marcus sat beside her, legs stretched out, nursing a chipped mug of tea. He looked up when Vivian came in and saw it instantly, the way her shoulders slumped, the fatigue in her eyes, the weight she'd been carrying finally set down. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hovering at the edge of the room, like a stranger afraid to ask for permission to belong. Grace looked up and patted the empty cushion beside her. "Come sit." Vivian did. Marcus handed her his mug without a word. She took it, wrapping both hands around the warmth, grounding herself in the heat, in the silence, in the presence of people who didn't need anything from her but her being there. She took a slow sip and exhaled. "I signed," she said. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask what she'd signed. He already knew. Grace perked up. "Is that good?" Vivian looked at her, something tender breaking in her chest. It's new, but yeah, I think it's good. Grace wrinkled her nose. Grown-up stuff is weird. Vivian laughed, the sound rough with exhaustion but honest. Yeah, sweetheart, it really is. They sat there for a while, the three of them, not saying much, the kind of quiet that felt like a choice. Later, when Grace had gone to bed, Vivian stood in the hallway, staring at the door to the spare room. Marcus came up behind her, close, but not crowding her. I've been thinking, she said softly, not looking at him, about making it permanent. What part? He asked. She turned to him slowly. All of it. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stood in the hallway, barefoot, arms crossed loosely over his chest, trying to read between the lines of Vivian's words. But there weren't any lines this time, no corporate riddles, no veiled conditions. She was looking at him the way people look when they've finally stepped off a ledge and are still waiting to feel the ground. She didn't flinch. I mean it, she said, her voice steady. I want to stay, not just for now, for good, with you, with Grace. Marcus looked past her, into the spare room, half storage, half makeshift guest space. The room she had quietly started making hers. A book on the nightstand, a sweater over the back of the chair, her scent still lingering faintly in the air. He met her eyes. You sure you're not running from something again? I'm not running, she said. Not anymore. The honesty in her voice was sharp, almost painful. It cut through every last bit of doubt he'd been carrying. You'd be giving up everything, he said, his voice low. I already did. Marcus stepped closer, slow and deliberate, like every inch was a question he was answering with movement instead of words. I don't have a lot to give you, he said quietly. I'm not going to wake up rich or clean-shaven or suddenly better at knowing how to say the right thing. She smiled, her eyes wet but glowing. I don't want perfect. I want real. He reached out and tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. His hand lingered at her cheek. I've been real for a long time, he said. Just didn't think anyone was ever going to choose it. Vivian leaned into his touch. I'm choosing it. I'm choosing you. In the dim light of the hallway, he kissed her, soft, certain. No questions left. No clock ticking in the background, just them, finally rooted in the same place. And down the hall, just out of sight, a little girl smiled into her pillow. She had drawn them together weeks ago. Now, life was finally catching up to the picture. The air felt different that morning. Not louder, not brighter, just still, like something long unsettled had finally come to rest. Vivian stood barefoot on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a steaming mug in hand. The sun was just beginning to climb above the horizon, casting long shadows over the dewy grass. The house behind her was quiet. Grace was still asleep. Marcus was in the kitchen making breakfast, humming under his breath, a habit he'd never noticed he had until Vivian pointed it out and smiled. She sipped her coffee and looked out at the gravel road, at the trees lining the fence, at the rusted mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. This place had once been nothing more than a dot on a map to her. Now it was the center of everything. The door creaked behind her. Marcus stepped out, pulling his jacket tight against the morning chill. You always up this early now? He asked, moving to stand beside her. Only when I need to remind myself this is real, she said. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just reached out and held her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. They stood like that in silence for a long while, until Vivian finally spoke. I've been thinking about adoption. Marcus turned to her slowly, unsure if he'd heard her right. She didn't hesitate. I'm not asking to replace anything. I'm not asking to rewrite her history. But Grace, she feels like mine too. And if there's a way I can be part of her life, really part, I want that. Not just in drawings, not just in moments. Marcus stared at her, heart thick in his chest. He wasn't a man who cried. He wasn't sure he remembered how. But something in that moment broke him a little. You'd really do that? He asked. "I already did," she whispered. And when Grace came running out minutes later, her hair wild and her laughter echoing into the sky, Vivian opened her arms. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't catching someone else's child. She was catching her own.